You are listening to AccessUW, a podcast series brought to you by the University of Washington Office of the ADA Coordinator, where we highlight insightful discussions, informative interviews, and valuable insights about accessibility, equity, and inclusion, all within the realm of higher education with experts across the UW. In terms of accessibility, each podcast and a transcript are made available at the Office of the ADA Coordinator's website at www.washington.edu/ADA.
Welcome back, folks, to AccessUW. I am Heather Evans, and I am delighted to have with me here today Dr. Jaipreet Virdi, who gave a wonderful public lecture for the University of Washington this week. And so we are delighted to have you here, and I want to invite you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey, UW folks, very happy to be here. I did learn what UW means, and I apologize for saying UW this whole time. So this is Dr. Jaipreet Virdi. I'm an associate professor in the history of medicine and disability coming from the University of Delaware. As Heather said, this week I gave a public talk about the history of hearing aids and design and what we can do to think about or rethink how to approach technology to create new equipped worlds. So I'm just here having an easy conversation about disability rights, and see what else we can do. Right, Heather?
That sounds great. That's what we're doing. Well, I want to start off with, you've already kind of introduced some tantalizing information thinking about CRIP worlds. But that gives us some clues to the perspective from which you approach disability. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved with the field of disability studies or the disability rights movement or the disability justice movement. I'll let you tell us your involvement or the degree to which you kind of came to find these things in your own time.
But one of the things that listeners should know is, if it isn't already clear, is that I am deaf, and I'm a historian. So being deaf already gives me a unique perspective to the world. I'm attuned, for example, to body language, to lip reading. I don't hear sounds, even with my hearing aids, the way that ordinary hearers might. But with this perspective, I also have an understanding as well of deaf culture and deaf history. And when I'm working in the archive and I come across stories of deaf people, it's always apparent when they are written by able-bodied people or when they're by deaf people themselves. And I look for these stories by deaf people, and sometimes they're not always apparent. So one example off the top of my mind was I was looking at a folder of a man who was filing for workman's compensation, and there was only one piece of paper in there, and it just had his basic information, his name, his address, what his disability was, and what kind of funds he was asking for. But then when I flipped the paper on the back, there was all these pencil notations. And this, by the way, was from the 1930s, the height of workman's comp. And there was this handwritten annotation over there, room 204. And then I realized, oh my goodness, this isn't just an application for workman's comp. This application was discussed at, an office, and the receptionist there is having a conversation through this written word with this deaf man who possibly could not communicate through sign language, or maybe there was difficulty in hearing and whatnot. But this, for me, because I'm deaf, because I do that, because I write down things when I can't understand them in conversation with people, it was very clear to me this was a conversation. So for bringing these two identities of myself together, a deaf person and an historian, helped me find the history that are otherwise hidden, forgotten, minimized, neglected, so on, in the archive. And from that, I want to tell more powerful stories about disabled people. I want to give them the legacy, elevate them to disabled ancestry so that collectively we can understand a full history of disability rights.
So I have a question here. I know that for some folks in the deaf community, they feel really strongly that even if they have a great, strong deaf culture and community, that they don't necessarily identify as disabled or see themselves as related to the disability community. And I've heard you now use those two words in relation to your own identity. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience between these two communities?
I think that's a really important distinction that some people make. For one thing, one's identity is one though. Okay, so like you come up with whatever term that you feel like best compelled you to project your identity to the world, or how you want other people to perceive you. I consider myself deaf with the little d instead of a capital D because frankly, I have 98% hearing loss. So I'm not hard of hearing by any formal classification. I'm deaf. But deaf is also how I feel myself to be. Like I feel more secure, more in line with my identity when I say I am deaf. I actually didn't start referring to myself as disabled until I went through a series of medical issues, including with stage 4 endometriosis and then later with ovarian cancer, both of which transform the way my body moves through society. Um, and and then for a while, I actually couldn't wear my hearing aids because the sound, like I was too sensitive to sound, so it was better for me to just be in silence. And then, because I'm a disability historian, I felt quite comfortable saying that I was disabled. And I do that now too. Like I am still disabled. I still have complications for my own medical issues. But I think one of the reasons why deaf people within a deaf culture who, really strong sense of community don't want necessarily to be aligned with the disability community is because they don't consider themselves as necessarily being disabled. Rather, they perceive themselves as a cultural and linguistic minority group. So I think that's the distinction there. And the grouping of the two together doesn't always work. Now, there are some people who say they are deaf and disabled. There are people who say they have multiple disabilities. There are people who refuse to say they're deaf and prefer to be called hard of hearing. So there's many different identities, and it is still a very personal, individual choice that we should also respect in addition to respecting someone's autonomy and their own body mind.
Thank you. And I love that metaphor of thinking about an identity as a door, and just one door of which there are many that we walk through or roll through. So switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask about one of the main concepts in your lecture that you gave here at UW. I love how quickly you picked that up. Was you talked about the disabled gaze. And I'm wondering if you can kind of unpack for us, what do you believe that we gain collectively as a community, as a society? What do we gain from learning from or adopting a disabled gaze?
Yes, so the disabled gaze is a concept that I developed to describe how disabled people project themselves to the world and how they wish others to view them. So I think of it as parallel to the queer gaze. And this was driven in part by, again, being a historian, by the archive, where I'm looking at sources by disabled people, by deaf people, where they're describing how crucial it was for others to recognize themselves as deaf or disabled. And I started getting really interested in the work of the deaf artist Dorothy Brett, who lived in New Mexico in the 20th century. And she wrote so much about her own experiences with deafness because she was facing a lot of ableism and stigma. And when she started to make use of an air trumpet, she named it Toby, and she inserts Toby as an identity in all of her letters. And other people who wrote to her also refer to Toby as Toby. And that was already fascinating. And there is a gorgeous portrait of Brett with Toby that was taken by Edward Weston in 1933. And I believe it's still at the Boston Museum of Art that you can view online. And I saw this, and it's such a powerful moment of Brett telling us, look at me with my trumpet. Look at me. I'm a deaf person. I am a woman. No, I'm a queer person. Like, she's very articulate in who she wanted to see. She's not telling us anything about social barriers, anything about her medical, clinical issue. She's really willing us to view her as a deaf woman. And for me, in art history, in visual culture, there's a lot of discussion about the gaze, and it's really crucial at guiding this kind of analytical frameworks that we do for visual, film, theater kind of work. And borrowing the gaze from that helped me unpack Dorothy Brett's self-representation, because she wasn't just sitting for a photographer. She was also painting self-portraits of herself as a deaf person, either holding her ear trumpet or wearing a hearing aid. So it's a very conscious, purposeful thing that she's doing. And then when I expanded my analysis of her work to other deaf and or disabled artists, they're doing the same thing. They are creating specific representations of themselves, asking us to perceive them as disabled people, because it's just one part of their overall identity. So I offer the disabled gaze as a way to think about how we can approach disability, not necessarily as through medical lens, with disability something to be fixed or to be cured, also through barriers that require more political activist maneuvering, but something much more smaller in scale. It's about an individual assertion of identity, an individual demonstration of their autonomy, precisely to ward off ableism and stigma. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing with it here.
Well, and frankly, that's plenty. That's a lot that you're doing with that concept, and it really resonates. I mean, I love it. I'm thinking of the work of Riva Lair or other disabled artists talking about, repatriating kind of narratives and identities of disabled people. So it's really fascinating. And so I'm curious, I know that the disability rights slogan is something that kind of emerged pretty early on. I won't, reveal how old either of you or myself is. We won't even talk about that. But I'm wondering if you can tell us, when you hear the phrase "nothing about us without us," what does that mean to you?
It means to me, anytime we write or talk about disabled people or disability history, we have to include them in there. Okay? If you're a historian of science and you're writing about some scientific experiment that eventually led to the creation of some technology that helped disabled people, are the disabled people in your story, are the scientists themselves disabled? I want us to think about how we can also use disability as an analytical framework, the same way we talk about race, gender, sexuality, class, etc. And that's what nothing about us without us means. It means to think about inclusion in a more profound way, to remember, most importantly, our ancestry. I think that's really crucial. I mean, this is all audio, so you can't really see, but I am actually wearing a t-shirt with Judy Human's slogan, and I love it. It says, "I want to see feisty disabled people change the world."
Yeah, I
And
love
that's
it.
what I want. Yeah, I want that too. Yeah.
Wow, that is really great. Well, I so appreciate you stopping by on a really packed schedule this week. And I want to let listeners know that if they go to our website, that we have a link to the recording of your talk, which again was just fantastic. And I want to thank you so much for being here. And also to encourage folks to research your work and maybe even purchase a book or two. Would you like to tell us about the books that you have for sale, Dr. Virdi?
Yes, so my first book is titled Hearing Happiness, Deafness Cues in History. It's published by the University of Chicago Press. So you can find the book on their website or anywhere wherever books are sold. My second book is an edited collection. So if you are a historian or disability historian and you really want to know more about the varied experiences of disability in Victorian Britain, the second book is titled Disability in the Victorians, Attitudes, Legacies, and Intervention. And there is an ebook version of both books. There is an audio version of Hearing Happiness as well. You can also read some of my other essays, both academic and public history. Some of them are linked on my website, jaivirdi.com, JAIVIRDI.com.
Great. Thank you so much. I know that I will definitely have some new books on my bookshelf soon.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. And thank all of our listeners for joining us. And we will see you back here at AccessUW.
Bye-bye.